So how do we challenge distorted thinking? Find out on this episode of IncreMental Health Tips. Welcome to IncreMental Health Tips. My name is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Liz. Today, we're going to be discussing how to challenge distorted thinking. Now, right off the bat, one thing we should address is it's important to know that we're not challenging the distorted thinking of others. That's not what we mean here. We mean challenging our own distorted thinking. So, Liz, why would we challenge our own thinking and not the thinking of others?
So I think a lot of times people find it easier to observe distorted thinking in other people. And so there's a tendency to think, well, that person has distorted thinking, I should challenge that. And we ignore that our own thoughts can be distorted, and our own thoughts have much more impact on us than what someone else is thinking because we're with ourselves all day long. So learning more, and we'll also learn more from challenging our own thoughts than we do from just challenging other people.
Well, I do think, as you mentioned, it's easier to observe distorted thinking in others. So in the same way that I can see distorted thinking in others, those others probably see very clearly my distorted thinking on certain things. And so it can be the kind of thing where if somebody who clearly has distorted thinking is offering me advice, I may not be necessarily open to taking that advice. So now, focusing in then on challenging our own distorted thinking, what are the prerequisites? What must we have in order to be successful at this process that we'll get into the process in a minute, but what do we need to go into the process to give us a better chance of success?
I think you have to have an openness to increasing your awareness about your own thoughts and how they're impacting you.
Okay, fair enough. Now, what about also coming to mind is not just an awareness of our own thoughts, but also a willingness to make changes to our thoughts, or a willingness to admit that maybe we have distorted thoughts. I think that can be particularly challenging for some people.
Yeah, I think everyone prefers when they're right. So it can be really difficult, especially if someone feels really insecure, to admit that they're wrong about anything. So recognizing that being wrong about something is not a value judgment on yourself, I think can make it easier to be willing to engage in something like challenging your own distorted thinking.
Well, and that's a really important point. And also to just be aware of how common distorted thinking actually is. Having distorted thinking doesn't mean we're wrong. Like, we all could experience a thought that maybe is a fearful thought. Like, just an example of something, you're a little nervous because you're walking down a dark hallway. It's not that you believe or think that there's anything that is a danger to you in that immediate area, but you're having that irrational thought, you're having that irrational fear, but you can actually challenge that and know that you are actually in a safe environment, and there's nothing to be afraid of in that context. So that is an example. So understanding, so when we say irrational thoughts, we mean the very common thoughts that we all have every day. So there's no stigma, there's no shame in admitting to having irrational thoughts. And I think getting past that can be a really important part of a really important part of the context in which we need in order to successfully challenge these thoughts.
In cognitive behavioral therapy, they're referred to as automatic thoughts because these thoughts happen automatically and can often have quite a lot of influence on us without us even noticing that those thoughts are there. So becoming more aware of these thoughts and recognizing how they're impacting us can really make it much easier to change anything that someone wants to change.
Right. So with that in mind, we obviously have to be ready and prepared and willing to make changes. So we've got all those ducks in a row. We've got all the requirements in place. So now, what is a specific strategy we can use to challenge distorted thoughts?
So one that is frequently used is a thought record. So this is a cognitive behavioral technique. Usually it's done in 3 columns where you identify the thought, how it's distorted, and an alternative thought. When I was in school, my professor used a 6-column approach, which I think is a little bit better because it includes your feelings and your behavioral reaction as well. And so it brings in that connection of how our thoughts also influence our behavior and our emotions, other than just looking at the thought.
Right, and the context of that can be really important too. There's a related aspect is there are these papers that they give to teachers when kids misbehave that are called ABC sheets. Now, the A stands for antecedent, B stands for behavior, and C stands for consequent. So the idea is, like, if a child is misbehaving, a teacher may look at the antecedent to that behavior. So, like, what happened right before the behavior, then look at what the behavior actually is and what the consequence of the behavior is in order to help redress that behavior with kids. But as applied to us in thought records, we're writing down what our thought is, what the distortion is, and then also what an alternate perspective could be.
Yeah, I find that when I'm working with clients, they tend to have a lot of trouble with thinking up the alternate perspective when they're first starting to do this. So that can take quite a bit of practice to really be able to get those good alternative thoughts or behaviors.
So how do we know the alternate perspective is right?
I think it can help when you talk to someone else about it. So this is partly why I like doing this with clients, because I can help them come to an alternative thought that is one that they can accept as true, but it also helps to alleviate that initial thought and feeling that they were having.
Right. So is the important thing the actual what the alternate perspective is, or the fact that there could be alternate perspectives?
I think the important thing is going through the process, because it's what builds awareness in the person. It helps them to identify the different levels of impact that their thoughts are having on them. So when you look at, here's my thought, here's the feelings that come up with that thought, here's the way it influences my behavior, and then looking at, well, in what ways is this distorted? And then thinking of, well, what's a more realistic thought? What's an alternative thought? And then thinking about how that should change your behavioral reaction. I think that whole process is, what has an impact on people. It raises their awareness. It makes change seem less intimidating because they've become more aware of what is really driving their behaviors and how much of an impact their emotions are having on them.
So in our closing minutes, can you walk us through an example that might help those who are listening apply this?
So one of the ones that I've seen come up with clients a lot is the thought, I'm a failure. And so that's often connected with feelings of inadequacy, sadness, and worthlessness. And so I also ask clients to identify which one of those is the strongest emotion and how strong is it on a scale of 1 to 100. And that helps them to figure out just how much of an impact it's having on them. And it can also help you if you're talking about multiple thoughts, and then when you start to talk about the emotional impact, then it identifies which one of those thoughts is actually the strongest one, and it can be really helpful to pinpoint that strongest one and deal with that first. And often with that feeling of inadequacy or worthlessness, the behavioral reaction is quitting. People just give up. They don't want to try anymore. And so when you start to look at the evidence, often there's emotional reasoning. I feel like I'm a failure, therefore I am a failure. Or labeling yourself as a failure because you didn't get the result you wanted. And there's often also jumping to conclusions where you're just assuming kind of a worst case scenario of the results of things through the labeling and emotional reasoning. So a rational substitute is that you can learn from failing, and the appropriate behavioral response usually is try again or try something different, or, figure out what's gone wrong. Do you need to move more towards something that's in a natural skill set? It's, actually thinking through, not just giving up.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today, but I think that this at least gives our listeners some sense of what this process is like, and obviously this can be a very difficult process, so it can be useful to undergo this process with a therapist. So, but if you're enjoying our content, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us. Now more than ever, we just really feel that awareness on mental health and awareness on these issues are just really important. It's been a pretty tough year and a half for everybody, and so please, if you value what we do, please share, like, subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter at IncreMental Tips. You can like us on Facebook. You can subscribe on YouTube. Listen to us wherever you find your podcasts. And let us know. Please feel free to comment with any topics you'd like to see us cover. And we upload new content every Tuesday at 11 p.m. Eastern. Until next time, remember that small steps can lead to big changes.